good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you're joining from. I'm Tony Vlahos with ExecuNet. I'm glad you're here. Today, we're talking about a path that more executives are exploring right now, franchise ownership. Not startups, not building something from scratch, but stepping into a proven model that can offer control and purpose and meaningful financial upside. And very importantly, often faster than a traditional executive job search. Keep that one in mind. So if you're between roles, planning a transition, or simply thinking about what's next, this might be a more viable and more rewarding option than you've considered. My guest, Gus Iurillo, knows this journey firsthand. He spent over 25 years in corporate leadership with companies like Coca-Cola and Colgate-Palmolive and Wyeth, and he grew up in his family's restaurant business. We're going to be talking about that a lot more later. But suffice to say, entrepreneurship is in his DNA, folks. And he's an award-winning franchise consultant and career ownership coach with the Entrepreneur Source, which is a trusted, valued ExecuNet partner. And Gus has helped more than 200 people make the shift into business ownership. Really exciting stuff. With that, Gus, hi, it's nice to see you again.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I kind of gave a little bit of this away. I mean, you've done it all, family business, corporate brands, and now you're not just helping people start businesses, you're also a franchise owner yourself.
Right.
So I'd love to know, I think we'd all love to know, what got you to make that leap and what surprises people most about your journey?
Sure. Yeah. So again, thanks for having me. Yeah, I grew up, similar to you, Tony. We talked about this beforehand in an immigrant family. So, business ownership was kind of like the most viable path for my family. When I was growing up, my grandfather actually started, it was a pizzeria restaurant that my dad took over. And when we were kids, it was expected you're going to work there and work there through high school, college, grad school, never with the intention of doing that as my permanent career. In fact, my dad discouraged, it was big. His big push was, I want you to get a college education. Then I got my MBA, all with the intention of moving away from that, which I had no problem because I remember thinking like how hard that was, for him and even me doing it part time. So, that moved me into my corporate career, which I just assumed that was going to be my path, and it was for a good, 15, 20 years, working at these Fortune 500 companies, in various marketing roles of increasing responsibility. But I got to a point in my mid 30s where I was kind of like, is this it? And it kept feeling like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. Quite frankly, I just got tired of the politics, the bureaucracy, managing up. I felt a little bit like a cog in a wheel, like how is what I'm doing having any impact on, the end customer? I just felt really removed from that, but I wasn't quite sure what to do. So I was fortunate enough, I was approached by a colleague, an entrepreneur source coach 25 years ago, and he took me through our process of helping people to explore different opportunities. And once he got to know me better, he presented Entrepreneur Source as one of three or four opportunities that I explored with him. And after probably 3 or 4 months of due diligence and soul searching and whatnot, I made the conscious decision to leave my corporate career behind, and I was a sole breadwinner in my home,
Mm.
to do this full time because I really felt like it was my calling. Like I didn't know that going in, so that'll be a common theme, I think. When it was presented to me, I didn't say, "Oh yes, that's what I wanted to do." It sort of snuck up on me, and that's the whole point of our approach, which is, hey, learn about yourself, right? You don't know the right answer. You don't have to know the right answer going in. The better you know yourself, or you're willing to learn about yourself through learning through these opportunities, you're going to make a better decision. So again, 24 years ago, I took the leap, became a franchise owner, love it. I've been doing it for 24. I've actually helped over 400 people start
I
their own.
got it wrong. I got it
No,
wrong.
that's okay. I think you probably pulled it off a website that's dated, but it's over 400 people and talked to thousands more. And I think the thing to answer your other question, the thing that surprises people is it's not nearly as complicated to make the transition as they think. Like I think people put obstacles in their own way. I'm not saying it's not hard work. I'm not saying business ownership and franchising is for everybody. But I think a lot of my clients are pleasantly surprised when they get to the end of their journey and they're like, wow, it's kind of like a roadmap. It's a little bit like paint by numbers. If I follow the system, I'm going to get very predictable results. because I think oftentimes people put obstacles in their own way because sometimes it's easier to kind of put your head in the sand and say, oh, maybe this isn't so bad, rather than stretch yourself a little bit, and step outside your comfort zone, which is what we try to do is help people step outside their comfort zone. And I think a lot of my clients were people who would have thought maybe they couldn't do this. And after going through the journey with me, they realized they could and they should.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, Gus, because reflecting on the times, we've all this year, and it seems like it's been one really long year of macro uncertainty and interest rates that kind of do this and do that, which creates a lot of risk aversion, a lot of fear in people's minds. So the
Right.
question on my mind for you, and I
Yeah.
think when people might be thinking, why
Yeah.
now? Why is this a good time to lean into executive franchise ownership?
Yeah, the thing from doing it for 24 years, I've kind of lived through the Great Recession with this business, the pandemic, ups and downs, unemployment that was 3%, unemployment that was 10%. I don't know that there really is a good time. Like I think I would understand, and I do understand why people would look at the uncertainty in our economy or political system or whatever, and that could make you nervous. My experience is it's almost like that's the wavy part of the pool. And if you own your own business and you choose wisely, that stuff almost doesn't matter very much. And I'll talk more about, how you choose wisely in a little bit. But I don't think the macro, I think it's more important to like do some self-evaluation and say, why now for me? Right? Because a lot of what I try to do is help people take a step back before they just start looking at things willy-nilly. And that's part of the reason our franchise exists is help people take a step back and say, what am I looking for this to do? Why do I want to own a business? I think that's almost more important because that's ultimately going to be the driver of their success. And if you choose wisely and you stay away from maybe faddish or foolish options, which there are definitely those out there, then you should be able to navigate, the ups and downs of the macroeconomy.
Yeah, and this leads to another important question, right? Which is you're looking at this opportunity, you conceptually can
Yeah.
appreciate it. How do you know? When do you know that this is the right thing for you to own a franchise? It's such a departure for many
Yeah.
from what they do all day long.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, selfishly, I'll say that's a lot of what we do, what we help people do. But even if you're going to do it on your own, I'd say the first thing you have to do is take a step back and do some self-reflection. I think what happens is sometimes people either get, they don't love their job or they get downsized. And if they're thinking about this, their first reaction is, let me go to the internet or let me Google or AI, like what's out there. And I don't know that that's necessarily the right first step. I think the right first step is take a step back and really be, and this is probably a process, it's certainly a process we take people through. What are you looking for business ownership or franchising to do for you that taking another job can't? And
Mm.
it usually falls into like four different quarters, professionally, personally, financially, geographically. So I spend a lot of time really helping people articulate their why, like why this, right? Because sometimes I'll talk to people and I think they could be great candidates to explore this. Um, but they really don't have a compelling reason why. And I think that's really what should drive someone is once they can articulate, what am I looking for this to do? Not only does it help narrow down the field of what types of options they should look like, but it almost becomes their North Star for when you're doing your homework. How do you navigate the vicissitudes of as you're exploring, you're going to have some emotional ups and downs. You need to have something to pull you through. And I think that's got to be your why or your North Star.
Yeah, and it varies, I guess, based on who the
The
individual
individual.
is.
Yeah.
But
Sometimes, Tony, I'll get people, I'm here in Richmond, Virginia. I'll get people, in the past where, hey, I've been downsized and I don't want to uproot my family. My kids are at a critical juncture in school and so their why is, I don't want to uproot my family. I want to put roots in this area. And if I stay in the job market, it's going to necessitate a move. That,
yeah.
that, that in and of itself could be a compelling reason to at least explore.
Mhm. Now, what we often hear
Yeah.
are not the whys, but the why nots.
Right.
What we hear is,
Yeah.
well, and we're going to bust some myths now, and these might be things that have been holding you back from all kinds of things. But we hear things here at ExecuNet like, gosh, am I too old to be leaning into this? Or I don't have a sales and marketing background. Is this something that I could possibly even imagine doing? Or my experience is in sector A, and I see these cool service-based franchises in sectors B through Z. How could I do this? Those are the things we commonly hear. Let's bust some myths.
Yeah, happy to. And I would say, people often ask me, why don't people do this? And I would say for the majority of people I meet, it's their own fears, self-limiting beliefs. We even refer to them as emotional detours, because sometimes it's easier to put those obstacles in your own way so you don't actually have to go through the effort of let me explore it, right? So it's easier to say, oh, it takes too much money or I'm too old or whatnot. Um, let's take the one of maybe I'm too old to start this. I looked at some data that my franchisor provided, across the system of the people that we work with, and what I found, and it sort of jives with my client base too, 50% of our clients are 50 or older. And we have a pretty good number that are even in their 60s because a lot of times people don't want to stop working. I mean, they might want to stop working in corporate America. They don't want to stop working entire, they want to do something that's meaningful they want to do. So I don't think you're ever really too old. I mean, it depends on your circumstances, but I think that's a myth. If you're doing something you love, you're not going to be digging ditches, right? You're not going to be doing physical work. You're going to be managing people or doing something else. I'm 60 myself. And I have friends that are getting close to retirement age, and they're all say, "Hey, when are you going to retire?" I'm like, "Why would I want to retire? I love what I do. I'm going to do this for the next 10 or 15 years. I'm work 20 hours a week. I love what I do. Why would I stop?" Right? So I think that's a common myth, and it's obviously tied to the individual, but I don't think I've yet to run into someone that I really felt was too old, to do this, if it's the right thing for them to do. I've also heard people think it takes more money than I have or I care to commit. I know we're going to talk about funding sources in a little bit. It's going to take too long to replace my corporate income. That's another common myth. I mean, it's going to take a little bit of time, but it usually doesn't take as long as people think because I think they sort of equate this with starting your own independent business, which could take a long time to make money. The whole idea behind a franchise, it compresses the learning curve so you're making money sooner than you would if you were doing this on your own. So I think those are the common myths, or probably one of the biggest ones is I'll know it when I see it, or I've got to find a product or service that I love. So I need to optimize around my affinity for the product or service. And I would say that's probably the least important thing. I think you have to believe in the product or service, but one of the things we try to help people understand is you have to really enjoy the role of the owner in that business. So you got to believe in the product or service, you got to stand behind it, but you really have to have a strong affinity with the role that's required for the owner in that particular type of franchise. That's really what we're trying to help people solve for. The role fit, work-life balance fit. If you get those two right, usually the money takes care of itself.
Right. I want to share one more, Gus, that occurred to me.
Sure.
I often hear from people, which goes like this. I've been in operational leadership roles my entire
Right.
career, 20, 30, 40 years.
Right.
I've been the guy in charge or the woman in charge.
Yeah.
And a franchise will quote unquote restrict my creativity because
Mm.
it is sort of a controlled environment. Like
Yeah.
people have said things like, well, it's a business in a box. Let's
Right.
talk about that a bit, please.
Yeah, I mean, and I could see where somebody would think that, and there's probably a kernel of truth in. I mean, there's certain businesses like probably like McDonald's where you don't have a lot of degrees of freedom, in terms of how you run your particular, unit, especially like retail food. But I can speak as a franchise owner, and I've helped a lot of other people. Most of these concepts, you have lots of degrees of freedom. Yes, there's a roadmap right around, hey, we're going to help you with the marketing, or we have a certain go-to-market strategy or operational plans or whatnot. But then there are lots of degrees of freedom. Even in my own business, I've pivoted my franchise where most of my clients come to me via referral, versus other forms of outreach that my franchisor provides me, because that's how I wanted to evolve my practice. I coach my clients exactly the way that I was taught because, quite frankly, I feel like that's the best way to help my clients get where they need to go. So, yeah, there are going to be some parameters, but I think if you're going to go the franchise route, you have to realize those parameters aren't there to constrain you. They're designed to help optimize your efficiency and get you from point A to point B with the least amount of time, effort, and money. And then there's still always opportunities to innovate on I don't even say on the margins, innovate in your business, as evidenced by in most franchises, if you look at their distribution of performance across their franchisees. An average performer might produce X result income. Top performers usually do 2 or 3X because they're doing something in addition to the core platform, right? So they innovate within that framework.
Yeah. And perhaps the most salient myth of all, drum
Yeah.
roll please, is franchising equals, and you touched on this earlier, franchise equals fast food, franchise equals McDonald's. So not true, right? And we're talking now executive level stuff.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of executives are curious about service-based businesses and other forms of franchises that are more, shall we say, elevated for the executive market. Talk to us about those, please.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, it's funny because, we mentioned like how many people I've helped. So the 400 people that I've helped go into a franchise, not a single one has gone into a retail food service concept.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I would advise against it. But there's some people who maybe should. I think it's a different animal. Um, for most of the people that I work with, yeah, service-based businesses, non-retail, but there's a place for retail, particularly when we talk about semi-absentee. But there are all sorts of different home and business services where you can either operate as the general manager or, build an organization or build a team of, people that are providing services to consumers and homeowners. Or if you're more inclined to B2B, there are some great B2B concepts. My concept sort of falls in that space. I've had clients go to leadership training, sales training, IT services, marketing service. There are all sorts of, the key is to find something that's a good fit for you. But yeah, food service is just, it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. It's what everybody sees and what
Yes.
everybody equates to
Right.
franchising, but like there's that whole part of the iceberg that's underneath. That to me is where the interesting concepts lie.
Absolutely. And another myth, and then we'll move on from here because there's so
Yeah.
much to cover everyone, but um, you're not restricted if unless you want to do this full time. You could do the semi-absentee model as well, which is a little more freedom. Talk to us about that. I mean, how you make those choices for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on the individual and their circumstances. I would say probably about 30% of my clients explore semi-absentee, 70% full-time. Usually the people who are exploring full-time, it's either I've been downsized and I don't know that I'm going to find another comparable job in corporate America, or I'm done with corporate America. I'm all in, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. There's a whole subset of franchises that either are designed to be semi-absentee or could go kind of either way, depending on how the complement of people. So I have plenty of clients that are like, yeah, I'm probably 4 or 5 years away from wanting to leave corporate America. But boy, it would be great if I could start something now on the side, investing maybe 10, 15 hours a week that, in 2, 3, 4 years could be replacing my corporate income, and that becomes my exit strategy. Or it just becomes a means of diversification. I've had people do that with their spouses. Maybe they had a spouse that wasn't working outside the home. They took over, ran it semi-absentee. I just had another client this year where he's retiring from corporate America, but he's opening a business with his 3 sons, adult sons. They're going to run the day to day, and he's going to provide, well, he provided the financing, but he also providing strategic guidance. But for him, it's kind of like a semi-absentee retirement business, and the sons are really going to run the day to day. So I think there are a lot of ways to play in this space, that people aren't even aware of. So it really depends on your own circumstances and what you're looking for the business to do for you.
Yeah. So let's move on to another leg of this journey, which is before you commit, what other forms of homework should you do as you explore franchising, Gus?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, as I mentioned before, you definitely need to do the soul searching and say, what are your criteria? Like, you don't want to just go out willy-nilly and just start looking because, there are over 5,000 concepts in the US alone. So how do you plant a flag and say, I'm going to explore, these? So it's important to know what are your success criteria. But then let's assume you've done that and you've narrowed it down to 3 or 4, like we try to help people do. it's important to do what we call validation. Some people might call it due diligence, but I think it's more than just due diligence. The nice thing about a franchise is people think franchises are sold, like you're buying a franchise. They're actually awarded, right? If the franchisor doesn't think you'd be a good franchisee, they're not going to award it to you. And that's important. They want you to do the due diligence because if you're not successful, they're not successful. They make their money as a royalty, which is a percentage of your revenue. So you want to do your homework, explore it, talk to the franchisors. They usually have pretty robust validation processes. We call it a validation experience or discovery experience, but where you go through different modules where they talk about day in the life of the owner, marketing support, operational support. Ask good questions. You can ask any questions. I always tell my clients there are no questions that are off limits. There are no stupid questions. So you want to talk to the franchisor and learn from their perspective. They all have to provide you a document called a franchise disclosure document or an FDD. You want to review that and scrutinize it. There's a lot of good information in there. And then finally, and probably most importantly, and you don't necessarily have to do it for every concept you explore. Oftentimes when I have clients explore three, they might talk to franchisees or franchise owners of a couple of them and talk to a good cross section of them. Remember, they have no vested interest in whether you do this or not, and ask them about their experiences. What do they love about it? What don't they love about it? Would they do it again? What do they wish they knew then that they know now? How much money did they make year one, year two, year three? You really scrutinize it, walk a mile in their shoes. If you really do the validation correctly, there should be no surprises and no ambiguity. You should know exactly what you're getting into before you have to make any sort of commitment.
Yeah.
And we
So,
try to create a safe space to do that,
abs
from a coaching perspective, but it's important to go through that journey because what you don't want to do is have a sin of omission where you forget to ask something and then you get into a business and you're like, oh, I wish I knew that.
yes. So we're going to press pause for like a few seconds, and I'm going to say thank you to all who've chatted in questions. I really appreciate that. And I've noticed there have been more than a few fives. I love that. We have a serious bunch. And I'm going to expect you fives out there to take that next step and schedule some one-on-one time with Gus. He's providing a lot of useful information now, clearly. And at the same time, you're probably forming some individual questions, maybe things that are a little more personal to you. And I totally get it. You want some private time to share your thoughts and get some direct feedback and really honest advice on whether and how you move forward. So please take advantage of the link that Will has chatted, and everyone else, even if you're remotely curious and you're kind of moving from the one spot over a bit, now's the time to schedule a time with Gus as well and asks things that are occurring to you in real time. He's there to provide you more than you're getting here. So we're going to talk about money next. All right. Let's talk money and the typical investment and how people that move forward, Gus, actually fund a franchise.
Yeah, no, it's a great question because it is one of I think can be one of the self-limiting beliefs that hold people back. I don't have enough money, right? I don't have X pile of money lying around. The reality is it can vary depending on how you approach it. It can be as little as I would say 75 to $100,000, all in, up to way into the hundreds of thousands. Even, somebody does retail, which I typically don't direct folks to. I would say most of my clients are probably investing anywhere between 100 and 200,000, and that includes franchise fee, which could be anywhere between 50 and 100,000, depending on how many territories they choose or acquire, and then working capital. You can even get funding to pay yourself. So I've had cases where I've had clients, that bought on the lower end of the investment spectrum where they were able to get a small business loan, an SBA loan, they call them, for up to $150,000 where they just had to put in 10% of their own money. So they put in 15, borrow 150, and part of that can fund the franchise fee, working capital, even paying themselves while the business is ramping up. So I would say it doesn't have to be a big investment. Sometimes I think people equate the bigger the investment, the higher the ROI. I've often found the opposite
Hmm.
because the more overhead there is, the more you have to push, to get, to a higher revenue level. And oftentimes with retail, you run into a capacity constraint where if you want to grow, I got to add another location and another location. Where if it's a service business and it's all about market penetration, yeah, maybe you're adding more people as, as variable cost or vehicles, but you can scale it quicker and for less expense and less capital, going the service-based route. So that investment, it can vary, but it can be as little as I would say 100 to 150 or
Mhm.
75 to 100 probably on the lowest end. And then in terms of how people fund it, it varies. There's certainly SBA funding out there, where you can put in as little as 10 or 20% of your own money and then borrow the rest from a bank with its SBA guaranteed. I have a lot of clients that utilize a program called ROBS, which basically you could refer to it almost as a self-directed IRA. It's a way where you can invest a portion, not all of it, a small portion of your IRA directly in your business without incurring tax penalties. So I would say 60% of my clients wind up utilizing that because there's some definite tax advantages both on the front end and the back end when you go to sell it.
Mhm.
I just helped a couple use a home equity line of credit. It was on the smaller end where it didn't make sense for them to apply for a traditional loan. So they used a HELOC to fund their business, which gave them a little bit more flexibility. I've seen people do securities-backed funding where, if they have securities that are outside of their 401k, you can get a loan against that cheaper than you can an SBA loan. And friends and family. I'm seeing a lot more millennials and maybe even some Gen Z getting their parents, hey, mom and dad, I want to invest in a business. And, it's sort of the generational wealth transfer. And in lieu of me waiting for you to pass, how about investing in this franchise, assuming all the numbers add up? And I'm even seeing parents do it in concert with their kids. So,
Yeah, yeah. And I guess the mounting cost of college tuition that
yeah,
gets
that too.
diverted to the franchise. Interesting.
Yeah.
So you said three magic letters that all together equate with when do I make my money back? You said ROI. And
Yeah.
so I know that's a really tough question to answer, and I know it varies.
Yeah.
But thinking about the investment
Yeah.
and the trajectory that executives,
Yeah.
are always mindful of, when
Yeah.
do you make that back? How does that work?
It's going to be a definite depends,
Yeah.
right? In that if it's part-time, that's going to look different because you might have a different complement of people. I always tell my clients, look, if it's part-time, don't expect to make any money your first year. You don't
Mhm.
need to. You have a full-time job, right? You're probably reinvesting to grow it. But I've seen plenty of people in their first year not make it back, but start making money. How much they're going to make is going to depend to a great degree on the concept they choose, their own individual drive and ambition. But I've certainly seen clients, even by their second year, replace their corporate income, depending on what they were making.
Mhm.
Um, I've seen clients that were surprised that, wow, I can actually surpass my income over time, because you can continue to grow and scale it. And you also don't want to forget the fact that because you don't, this is part of the paradigm shift, you're building equity in a business, right? When you're in a job, if you leave the job, maybe you get some severance on the way out, but that's it. You build a business up, I've had clients where they've sold their business, for three or four times cash flow. So, you're also building equity as well, right? So obviously, if you're doing your homework, you're going to build a 3 to 5 year P&L for the business. So, by the time you have to make a decision whether you're going to do it or not, you should be empowered with the information of how long is it going to take me to get to this level, that level, that level. So how am I going to utilize funding to basically get me where I need to go, both near term and long term. Because there's a distinction between what you need to make, right, to pay the light bills and whatnot, and where you ultimately want to get to. So it does depend. But I would say, Tony, most of my clients are pleasantly surprised at the ramp up and the the ability to generate cash flow versus their expectations because I think a lot of their expectations are based on what they hear from people that started their own independent business where you're
Wow.
figuring it out, right? So if you're figuring it out, that could take 3 to 5 years just to figure it out. Here, the systems are in place. It's designed to compress the learning curve and the time it takes from starting the business to making money.
Yes, and I was going to bring that up, so I'm glad you anticipated the question. I bet people that call you will have on their minds, hey, Gus, wouldn't it be better if I just, acquired an existing business or even built one from scratch? But I think you've kind of answered but there are drawbacks there. Yeah, maybe you should reinforce those, Gus, for us.
Yeah, and look, it depends on the individual. I always tell my clients the thing you have to remember is any franchise you're looking at, somebody was the original independent business owner, right? So they all started as independent businesses. And so that person or people who started that franchise, they were the pioneers that took the arrows in the back, right? And that's how you have to look at independent business. You've got to be comfortable with a lot more ambiguity because you're figuring it out. You're going to go through a lot of trial and error, which is fine. Uh, because I think sometimes people think it's going to cost me less money, right? Because I'm not paying a franchise fee. But what's the opportunity cost of your time? If it takes you 3 years to make money and I can make money in a franchise in 6 months to a year, and replace my corporate income within a couple of years, what's that worth to me,
Right.
right? So there's the compressing the learning curve. There's the system-wide support that you get that I think people often overlook, in that, look, I'm in a franchise where my franchisor has referral partnerships with hundreds of different franchise organizations. I don't have to go out and negotiate those or build those relationships. That's done for me. That frees me up just to coach my clients. If I had to do that, I'd be working 80 hours a week instead of, 20. So there's a force multiplier effect of being in a franchise that you really need to understand. Like, what does the franchisor bring to the table, both during the startup phase and an ongoing phase that amplifies your potential to make money? And then, quite frankly, there's also the best practice sharing amongst the franchisees that you don't get as an independent business owner because business ownership can be a little bit lonely. So
Yeah.
it's nice when you're in a business where you can have colleagues that you can both commiserate with, but also share best practices and learn from. And, we do that on a weekly basis in my franchise, where I'm plugging in with other franchise owners. People have no problem picking up the phone and calling one another and, asking for help that you don't get when you have your own independent business.
No, this is very, very true. And to underscore it, that franchisor is setting you up to succeed, not to fail.
Right.
They want you to succeed. So, I guess here's the question.
Yeah.
When do franchisees succeed and when do they fail? Again, that I know it
Yeah.
depends, but in basic terms, you'll succeed.
Yeah. My experience, because I think and this is another misconception people have. They think, look, you're either a business owner, you're either cut out for it or you're not, right? You have to have that fire in the belly. You don't. Most of my clients are what I would call accidental entrepreneurs, where, hey, corporate America let me down, so I need to find something else. And it's overly simplistic, but it's true. If you follow the system, the roadmap, you're going to get predictable results. So the thing that's often said about franchising, it's simple, but it's not easy. It's simple. Where people can go off the rails is where they overcomplicate it, or they start to say, "I know better than the I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do my own thing." Like they get into it, and then they're not innovating. They're just going off the reservation completely, and or they don't put in the effort, or something happens, but they have a pretty high rate of success. If you look at the FDD for most of these franchises, they have to publish, here's a list of all our franchisees and anybody who's left the system. The people that are in the system versus people left, it's 80-20, 90-10. So most franchises I see, tend to do well. Any client I've ever worked with that has followed that roadmap has typically gotten the results they wanted. And in the few instances where I've had clients that weren't successful, if they're honest with themselves, and they usually are, and they're honest with me, hey, I didn't do what I was supposed to do.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
that's why it's so important to go through the journey. It's a self-discovery journey as much as it is due diligence. It's not just the math. Because I'll be the first one to say to my clients, I go, look, if we work together, I'm going to help you make a better decision than you probably would have made on your own. But
Mm.
that decision might not be to become a franchise owner, and that's okay, right? You may go through and say, I can't make the paradigm shift, even though I know logically this makes sense. Maybe it doesn't make sense for me. Maybe I'm not ready, whatever. You've got to be ready because, it is a paradigm shift in terms of the accountability, the responsibility. You've got to be driven. You got to have some grit, and some resilience. It's not the week in, week out paycheck. What you put in is what you get out. And some people are really compelled by that, and other people are discouraged or nervous about that. And so part of the journey is figuring out, am I ready?
Yeah, and how often do we get the chance, folks, to have that outside perspective weighing in, not telling you what to do, but helping you make an informed choice? That's a rare, rare thing. Which leads me to a couple of more questions, Gus.
Sure.
Your engagement model, I know, and just to be clear, talking
Yeah.
to Gus will not cost you anything except 15 minutes of your time, folks. Beyond that, tell us a bit about how that works.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Tony, was part of what drew me to this business model 24 years ago is that I never had to ask my clients for money because I don't charge them anything. We have referral relationships, I won't even call them partnerships, with hundreds of different companies that run the gamut of every type of franchise that's out there. And so we sort of vet them, we have them in a portfolio, and our job is to try to match our clients up if someone becomes a client with maybe the three that we think best align with their goals, that are different enough from one another, that make sense in their geography, etc. If somebody works with me and they go through this journey of discovery and they land on an opportunity and choose to move forward, then I'm compensated by that franchisor, not
Mhm.
my client, by the so my clients never pay me. The other thing, unlike, so it sounds like a realtor almost, like a buyer's agent. The other thing to be aware of is they all pay us about the same, so we don't have any bias for one over the other. And they can't charge you more because you came through us. By law, what their franchise fee is in their franchise disclosure statement is what it is. So I always tell my clients you can be financially indifferent, whether you work with me or not, because the franchise fee is going to be the same. The reason that franchisors are willing to partner with us as an organization is we bring them better prepared people, like we prepare people for the journey and make sure they're asking the right questions and have gone through the soul searching and whatnot. So they tell us very pointedly that our clients tend to make better franchise owners than people who self-select in off the internet.
Yes. Wow, we've covered a lot of terrain. I know it's been high level
Yeah.
on purpose. We couldn't possibly compress everything you need to know in the 45 minutes we devoted today, but hopefully you got some good information here. I think you did, and got some bearings as well. And again, I'm going to encourage you, click through schedule time, talk to Gus, and the gift is a copy of a book. Gus, maybe you want to tell people more about what they actually pick up as well. It's a copy of Queer Revolution, which is written
Yeah.
by the founder of the Entrepreneur Source, right?
Yes. So it was written by our founder, Terry Powell, in concert with a number of us. And it's basically a book that we published, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. It's been updated since then. And it's not really so much a how to buy a franchise as it is how to determine if this may be an appropriate avenue to explore and how to get your head in the right space to even think about it. Kind of what we were talking about today. It's a very easy read. It's paperback. When I give it to, anybody that I'm speaking to, I say you can read it all in one sitting in about an hour, or you can bounce around chapter by chapter. It's almost like a reference guide. And it's our gift free to basically anybody that reaches out to us and wants a copy of it. I'm happy to send it to them either electronically, Kindle, Audible, or if they want me to send them a hard copy, when they book an appointment with me, they can just give me their home address and I can drop one in the mail to them. But it's a really good read, and I think it helps people really reflect on what's important to them.
That's terrific. So I'm going to say, Gus, and then I'm going to ask you one last thing, but thank you for your time. Thanks for making time and sharing your insight. Thanks to the many of you who tuned in today and always for your marvelous questions. I learned a lot just by having the privilege of asking those questions, and I hope you learned a lot too as well. Gus, the last question is, any parting thoughts that you want to share with our viewers today about as they lean in and consider this option, fundamentally, what should be on their minds?
Yeah, I would say, look, if this has even tickled your fancy, as you said at the beginning with the rating 1 to 5, even if it's a 1 and you're just like, hey, maybe I want to learn a little bit more about it, you don't have to be like convinced this is what you want to do. I would say the vast majority of people I've helped become a franchise owner were people who referred to me like, hey, somebody told me I ought to talk to you. They weren't saying I want to buy a franchise. And the more they learned about it, the more they discovered that, hey, this is something I need to consider. So I think if you have any inkling, you owe it to yourself to at least learn a little bit more about it. it doesn't mean you have to work with me or explore it. And even if you explore it, you might decide it's not right for you. But if you're at a crossroad in your career, I would just say you maybe owe it to yourself to reach out and learn a little bit more, just to discover, is this something that maybe needs to be part of my consideration set now or possibly even in the future?
Yeah, great advice. Well, thank you again, Gus. Thank you all,
My
and I
pleasure.
wish you a pleasant day. Bye for now.